Wherever you are in the world, welcome to part two of my take on why the Middle East conflict is part of a larger geopolitical conflict which will embrace China. We appear to be in a geopolitical chess game. While Israel's objectives in their conflict are clear, the end game of this entire conflict is not so clear. It isn't just to destroy Hamas or clear out the Gaza Strip so Israel can put resorts there or gain access to the newly developing gas fields. Those are viable objectives, but an escalation that has nothing to do with Hamas looks likely. What's more likely to happen is much greater than Israel's defense or USA's local goals to steal Syria's wheat or oil. Those are minor steps in a much greater goal, and that goal is to prevent China's continued growth. A full-blown Middle East crisis will reduce China's access to gas and oil from the region, perhaps even stop it altogether. Now, I'm not attempting to bring China into a conflict where it doesn't belong, and when you've heard me out, I think you'll see what I mean. The USA didn't move one carrier strike group into the region. That would be more than enough. More than enough to handle the Gaza conflict anyway, if Gaza was what this was all about. It moved 4 carrier strike groups into the region. It's also moved Marines from bases in other parts of the Middle East to be on standby, thousands of them. And it's already striking targets in Syria in what Lloyd Austin describes as self-defense. The UK and Australia are also sending troops to the region. And this display of strength isn't necessary for a military action against Hamas insurgents. Without access to oil and gas from the Middle East, it must be assumed that China's progress will be stymied. And to a point, that's true. Stymied but not strangled. To really appreciate why the Middle East conflict is almost certainly part of a wider game, we need to widen our lens and look at what's going on in and around China, or what's been going on over recent years. Doing so makes it clear there's much more to this conflict than just the Middle East. A color revolution in Hong Kong didn't work. 70 years of lying about Xinjiang or Tibet hasn't worked. Empowering, arming, and propagandizing Taiwan hasn't worked yet. Accusing China of a genocide inside of its own borders hasn't worked. Economic coercion and sanctions haven't worked either. So cutting off China's oil supply and blockading their trade routes are the only ways left to stop China's growth. One of the most admirable things about China is its long-term planning and its ability to change course. So while Middle East oil and gas are incredibly important, China can and has diversified its sources of energy. When we look at these through this wider lens, we can see pieces of the USA's endgame coming into play. Attempts at destabilization in Xinjiang are funded by USA's National Endowment for Democracy. They've been unsuccessful, but they were never designed to bring democracy to the region. They were designed to deny China access to several things. One is the massive gas fields discovered there. Another is to disrupt pipelines that already bring gas into and across the region from Central Asia and Russia. And the most important thing is they are the roads and trains running straight out of China and into Kazakhstan and other Eurasian countries to access their markets and travel all the way across to the west. All of these go through Xinjiang. In the event of a conflict between USA or its proxies and China, the eastern seaboard would undoubtedly face a naval blockade of Western ships. Once we know this, we can understand why over 15,000 trains a year traveling from China to Europe through Xinjiang are so important. But US efforts to disrupt China's Western trade routes go a lot further than just destabilizing Xinjiang. They also affect the neighbors. In 2022, Kazakhstan experienced an attempted color revolution. Kazakhstan is perhaps China's most important Western neighbor and a place where most of the pipelines and trade travel through. Russian forces put an end to it. NATO and UK's MI6 had their fingerprints all over this, according to the Ron Paul Institute. We're seeing attempts right now at destabilizing Myanmar, where another gas pipeline travels into China's south. Myanmar's been hit with sanctions, aid cuts, export bans, and without conflict in Myanmar, as well as receiving gas, China would be sending trucks and eventually trains across the country to the Indian Ocean. And although the NED still calls it Burma, Myanmar receives massive donations from them. China's relationship with Pakistan is good, but a recent US-backed coup changed the form of governance there from a democracy into a puppet. With their most popular democratically elected leader now in prison and thoughts that he could actually face execution. The significance of this is clear because the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was set to allow growth to the region, including Afghanistan, and would have given China another route to the Indian Ocean through the port of Gwadar. Since 2017, the US State Department has been helping Mongolia. There are scholarships, Peace Corps volunteers, political, cultural, education, and defense cooperation. There's a lot of US aid. Everyone in the world knows that US aid is not the bonus it was meant to be when Kennedy first introduced it. And why is the USA so keen to develop great relations with Mongolia? This is apparent when we find out Mongolia is the source of up to 40% of China's imported coal. Russia is second, but the USA can't disrupt that. So they attempt to disrupt the trade routes for it, which travel through either Xinjiang or Inner Mongolia. And these are both places that the NED have spent years funding. While the world looks on and often criticizes these coal imports, China has made it clear it will carbon peak in 2025 and be carbon neutral by 2060. It's already well on the way to achieving these targets, so this outlook for coal inputs is serious in the short term, but over the next few years will have a lessening impact. The time to capitalize, if the US so wishes, on a shortfall from this source is right now. As with space exploration, when the USA banned China from sharing tech with NASA, China went ahead on its own. When the US banned China from obtaining the technology for the high-level semiconductors, China went ahead on its own. And the same will happen when Mongolian coal is cut off by the USA. China will go ahead on its own. China has massive reserves of its own coal. It has gas, it has oil, it even has plenty of less traditional sources of carbon such as methane hydrate or fire ice. But more importantly, China has within its borders more solar energy and more wind power energy than the rest of the world combined. So while an oil embargo would definitely impact and it would create hardships, it would not completely strangle China's ability to continue. What could really hurt China is the inability to ship manufactured goods from the eastern seaboard, and that is why China has built a defensive, not an aggressive navy. It's also why China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is so important, so goods can be shipped via Gwadar in the Indian Ocean. And it's why China would love to see a peaceful Myanmar, so that other overland routes to the Indian Ocean can be operated. The Middle East, terrible as it is now, has the potential to escalate, but the wider ramifications are clear. If people in Washington have a longer game with China, the most important move is a blockade of oil and gas heading to China. But in order to reach the strategic goal of halting China's growth, they needed several smaller pieces in place. Unfortunately for them, China is proving to be the better player. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China, and especially if you've watched both of these episodes, extended takes. I appreciate your time and look forward to seeing your comments in this comment section. Bye for now.